What's going on, everybody? In this video, I want to show you guys how I took my content writing company, 1 Second Copy, from $10,000 a month all the way up to over $90,000 a month at our peak using productization. Now, productization is one of those terms that I think a lot of people have heard about, but not too many people have actually pulled back the curtain and investigated. And what I want to do in this video is just provide you guys a step-by-step roadmap to how to productize your own business, whether it's an agency or an info product or a coaching company or what have you. I've never seen anybody actually talk this pragmatically or this simply about productization, and I thought that this video would be valuable whether or not you are somebody that owns a business right now that needs to productize or somebody that's just considering doing so in the future. So regardless of whatever camp you fall in, if that sounds like something you're interested in, stay tuned and let's get into it. So I recently accepted a really big contract to basically move to Prague for the next month and then work hand in hand with a company to productize their business, implement a bunch of automated systems, do a bunch of operations. This is the sort of stuff that I love to do. And I'm gonna dive into what I'm doing for that company near to the end of the video. But before I lead into that, I wanna just talk about what productization is, why you should productize, where productization came from, a couple of the motivating factors that have made productization so popular in agencies today. So in any sense of the word, productization is probably the most impactful thing that you can do for your business if you run an agency, if you haven't already done it. Like, this is something that will completely change the game, not necessarily because it'll help your top line. So it's not necessarily going to help your revenue, although it is definitely, in my opinion, something that makes it way easier to scale a business, but because of its impact on profit. And there's a phrase that I always hear in the agency space, and it's that revenue is vanity, profit is sanity. And that's very true, because when you're running a marketing agency or an automation agency or just some type of service, typically you can grow your top line extremely quickly to like pretty sizable numbers pretty quick. Like, you can get $50,000, $100,000, and $150,000 a month. But the question is, how much of that are you actually keeping at the end? Because agencies are such a people-focused business, what always ends up happening for the novice entrepreneur is they will grow their top line like crazy, it'll be this big exponential spike thing. They'll be like, I'm making $100,000 a month. And then because the only way that they know how to solve the problem is just by hiring a buck ton of people, when they look at the end of that month and they try and determine, okay, how much of this actually came into my pocket, it's usually abysmal. It's usually like 5%, 10%, 15%. So productization is a way that you just completely avoid that. And it's probably just one of the simplest levers that allows you to, I want to say, double your profit margins if you're just like an average agency owner. In some cases, triple if you are sort of struggling with some of the things that I'm going to talk about now. So what is productization? Well, most agencies struggle with scope creep. They struggle with variable cost of goods sold. If you're a marketing agency and you take on this big social media project, you have KPIs that you set and you have you're trying to deliver some result for that client. But most of the time it's not super clearly defined. It's not like we're gonna get you to 10,000 followers in exactly 38 days, right? Normally it's like we're doing monthly marketing packages for you. So we're gonna do certain things, but what sort of outcomes you get are totally up to you. And as a result of that, a lot of the time projects get scope creeped. And so projects that you initially started doing where you thought that your team was only going to do X, Y, and Z, well, now you've also added A, B, C, D, E, and F in. Another big issue is with a lot of these projects, specifically in marketing agencies, but also in automation agencies, I've found, just running one, projects can get extremely bloated very quickly, and then they can also take a lot longer than you initially scoped, which inevitably leads to a poor client experience, and that leads to poor retention. And, it always costs a certain amount of money to acquire a customer. And so anytime you can retain a customer rather than acquire a new one, you should. Like, if you think about it, if you're running an ad campaign, it costs you an average customer acquisition cost of $300 or something to get somebody on board. And you're doing some type of monthly service, sure, you could just continue growing your customer base and paying $300 every single time you acquire one. But if you just get one person to renew, then you're basically getting them to renew for a cost of $0, right? And so retention is always better than acquisition. Anyway, so, projects get bloated. They lead to just poor client experience. People aren't very happy. It's just not a situation you want to work in. So what productization is basically when instead of providing a bespoke agency experience or something that's a little more white glove, what you do is you try and provide the exact same experience every single time that you deliver a product or a service. And I'm talking exact same experience. That's the entire reason why you productize. And the idea is to turn your service, which is something soft and fuzzy and warm and loose around the edges, into like a physical, almost like product, something that's extremely rigidly defined, something that, it's very clear what this thing is and what it does, and something where there's basically no miscommunication, expectations are set, and then you can start, fixing a lot of the problems that usually plague companies, like what I was talking about before. And so, these problems, there are 1,000 that you think that you know right now, and there are also like 1,000,000 that you do not even know about, that productization solves. And I'll get into that next. So obviously the question is, okay, like what are those problems and why would you want to productize? Well, the simplest way that I could put it is productization enables you to fix your cost of goods sold. If you guys are unfamiliar with cost of goods sold is, it's basically all the time and energy and money that goes into producing the thing that your clients, want. So some people are going to say that this is technically referred to as cost of service in the agency space, whatever. I just call everything COGS. But like, the COGS might be in an agency. Like, let's say you're doing a marketing campaign and you have some type of like monthly check-in or whatever. Well, it's the amount of money that it costs you to pay the people. Maybe you're doing it per hour to run the marketing campaign. It's the amount of money that it costs you to like pay for your Slack channel or something like that, so that you can host a place for you guys to have that conversation. It's the amount of money that it costs for you guys to, invest in like the education required to do that specific thing. So maybe there's some documentation that like a new hire needs to read in order to do that thing. Basically, it's all the money that goes into providing that particular service to the client. And the reason why COGS is so important in business is because basically it lets you get a feel for whether or not this is like a good business vertical to go in, or whether or not the way that you're doing this is profitable and something that's scalable and growable and that sort of thing. So productization basically lets you reverse engineer and then figure out what your cost of goods sold are going to be every single time, with basically zero risk of any scope creep, zero risk of any project bloat, zero risk of ever going over, and zero risk of ever just like, pulling your pockets inside out and realizing that you got fuck all in there at the end of the month. And this is one of the reasons why people like it so much. An added benefit is when you productize, you understand exactly how many staff members you need in order to deliver the service that your clients want. You understand exactly when you need to hire a new staff member to do it, right? If I know that, my staff member X can take on 10 clients and I'm at 9 clients right now, you best believe I'm going to start thinking, I should probably start looking to hire when I get my 11th. So very, very simple and very easy and very scalable in that way. And then it also allows you to manage your resources, which in modern agencies usually just means software subscriptions and that sort of thing. So productization just lets you kill like 1,000,001 birds with one stone. And probably more importantly than that, it lets you justify spending time and energy internally towards building systems to deliver that product better and faster and more streamlined and more profitably every single time after. Basically lets you, if you think about it as an example, if we could dial back the clock 100 years, it basically lets you invest in your own manufacturing plant and then buy the machinery needed to produce the same goddamn thing every time and just do it better and faster and cheaper than everybody else. So that's why you would productize. That's what productization is. What a lot of you guys are probably wondering is, okay, Nick, then how the hell do I actually productize my agency? And that's what I'm going to do and talk about right now. So this is something that unfortunately I've never seen anybody just lay out, in my opinion, as simply as I've done here. Productization is basically productization, baby. It's basically like, I think, a 7 or maybe 8-step process where you start at the end and then you work your way back to the beginning. And productization can also help you figure out your prices if you've never really, determined how to price, or if you're still pulling prices out of your ass when the client inevitably asks you in the sales call. It just lets you solve so many things. And so that's what we're going to talk about right now. So here's a step-by-step guide to productizing your agency. Very first thing you need to do is determine what type of service are you providing. Are you providing a one-time service, or are you providing a recurring service? Now, I highly recommend, if you guys are in the agency space, you find a way to make your service recurring. You try and get away from one-time services as much as possible. It's not impossible to grow an extremely profitable and big business with one-time services. I know a bunch of companies that do. I always shout out my boy Joe Davies at Fat Joe with his like 8-figure productized SEO company, because this is a perfect example of one. But you best believe that it's really hard, and you have to like really know your stuff like these guys do in order to make it work. So figure out if your service is one-time or recurring, and if it's one-time, ask yourself if there's any way to make that recurring. If it's recurring, then define the time schedule. So, it's recurring, but like on what basis is it recurring? Is it recurring every week? Is it recurring every month? Is this something that recurs every quarter? When I say recurs, I mean like, what is the client getting every week or month or quarter, basically? So, if you deliver a weekly report, then I count this as recurring every week. And so everything that goes into that weekly report, you're just going to repeat the next week. If you're doing like a once a month call or something like that, where you go over some detailed thing, then that's recurring every month. And so, start looking at costs on a weekly and a monthly basis. Okay, great. So assuming that now you guys, have determined whether or not your service is one-time or recurring, it's time to actually go ahead and productize it. So step one is you need to figure out your deliverables. And this is me starting at the end. Once we figured out our deliverables, we can start working backward to how we're going to get those deliverables done, who's going to do those deliverables, how to staff, how to hire, how much money to spend on people, and that sort of thing. But it all starts with a deliverable. Now, a lot of people don't actually fully know what a deliverable is. And it's cool because I didn't actually know this until quite recently. But I'm just going to give you a bunch of examples and hopefully you'll be able to pattern match this. So for instance, if you're a lead generation agency, which, I used to be a lead gen agency, I used to sell leads. A lot of the time somebody asks you, hey man, what's your deliverable? What's the first thing that's going to come to mind? You're probably going to say, my deliverable is leads. That's what I do. I'm a lead generation agency. I deliver leads to my customers. But in reality, deliverables are more nuanced than that. The question that you got to be asking yourself is, how are you delivering these leads to the customer? Like, what form is the customer getting, these leads in? Is it an email once a day with a list of all the leads that you generated? I personally think that's a terrible idea, but some people do it. Is it a weekly report? Is it every time a new lead gets generated through maybe an ad or something, you populate the client's CRM, right? Whatever your form of delivering it to the client, whatever the client is experiencing, whatever service you're providing, that is the deliverable. The deliverable isn't the lead, the deliverable is the form that the lead is coming in, right? So this is a simple rule, but it's just something your clients can see, they can feel maybe, or potentially they can touch. Obviously we're on the internet, so probably not gonna be able to feel or touch it, but they can damn right see it, and that's what's important. Another example is maybe you're an advertising agency. A lot of the time people are going to say, well, my deliverable is ads. We create ads, so we deliver ads. But what is the client actually seeing? The client doesn't actually care about the ads that you're generating. Most of the time they care about what the ads are doing. And so usually you tell that to the client or deliver, again, some type of maybe weekly report or monthly status check or a call, that happens quarterly with a strategist or something like that. And so that is the deliverable. The weekly call is your deliverable. The report is your deliverable. And with those deliverables, when we reverse engineer it, obviously we're going to figure out, well, shit, in order to get this deliverable, I also need to make an ad campaign. But the deliverable is like the final thing that gets sent to the client. And that's what we need to worry about first. Another potentially more palatable example for a lot of you guys is an automation agency. So, I've run an automation agency for quite a while. Now I do automation freelancing. A lot of the guys that are watching this video are doing so because I have a bunch of automation courses basically up right now for make.com. So you're asking yourself, okay, well, if I'm an automation agency, what the hell is my deliverable? Well, it's probably automations, right? Maybe it's the systems that I make. And it's like, yeah, in a way, but what does the system mean to the client? The vast majority of clients don't give a shit about the systems. They care about what the system does for them, for one. But two, like they can't really see your system if they've never logged on to make.com or Zapier or something before, right? So consider what your deliverable is. Well, yeah, it's gonna be, a scenario in Zapier or make.com or some other no-code tool. But more importantly, it's probably gonna be the video that you record at the end of your delivery when you're actually finished testing the flow and then you kind of hand it over to the client. It's the email that you send to the client at the end of every build, right? The deliverable is what the client feels, what the client tangibly understands, and that's the thing that's most important to them. And the reason why I put the deliverable first and why we start with this is because one, this helps us define all the work that goes into the deliverable, but two, it gets you focused on the client experience, which is the most important part if you're in the service business. The clients don't give a shit about what really goes into it. All they care about is the end result. And you could spend all the time in the world and have the best processes ever to do the thing, but if you can't show the client the thing well, and if that part of your processes sucks, then you're never going to make it, anywhere really big in the service space. So anyway, yeah, define your deliverables. And the way that I do this is I will go into a Google sheet and I'll just have a little line called deliverables, and then I'll just make a new column for every deliverable. So this is one deliverable, that's another deliverable, that's another deliverable. Literally just take out a pen, go to a note app, just write down whatever your deliverables are. If you're watching this video and you own an agency, do that right now. I'm sure it'll help you. Now, once you guys have your deliverables, this is where productization gets really interesting. Because basically for every deliverable, your next step is to break that deliverable down into the tasks that created that deliverable. And we're gonna get pretty deep here, but a good example of this is, let's say you are a marketing agency again, and you do maybe pay-per-click ad agency, let's do that. So you're a PPC agency, so you develop ads for clients and you try and get them ranking #1 on Google or whatever for some specific keyword through ads, right? The deliverable that you've defined is, a report that you deliver once a week. And then that report comes alongside like a weekly call where your strategist goes through the results. They have a quick chat with the client, and then they determine sort of what are next steps, whether they can just continue what they're doing, whether they need to pivot, that sort of thing, right? That's your deliverable. So what goes into that deliverable? What tasks are required in order to make that deliverable happen? Well, in order to have a weekly call with a report, you need to obviously generate the report, right? So how do you generate a report on ad campaign performance? Well, you need a source of the data that has that ad campaign performance. How do you get data on ad campaign performance? Well, obviously you need to run an ad campaign. It's okay, well, how do we actually run an ad campaign? Well, we need to write an ad. We need to write some copy, get some creative done. We need to probably get it checked by the client. We need to upload it to some ad PPC thing, maybe Google, right? We need to run it for a long enough period of time so that we can actually generate the report and have enough data. And so basically what you're doing here is you're starting at the end and then just working your way backward further and further and further to sort of the very first step involved in the process. And you're going to list every single task that goes into them. Be as granular as you could possibly be here, because if you leave anything out, you're not gonna really be able to productize properly. You're gonna miss a couple things. It's gonna screw up your calculations later. So, in order to build that ad campaign, you gotta create a keyword list. So then ask yourself, well, what goes into a keyword list? Well, in order to do that, I need Ahrefs or something like that. Then I need some copy, and then I need some creative, and I need some blah, blah, blah. This is probably the most intensive part. I know that question 1 looks like it's way longer than question 2, but in terms of the amount of time and energy that it'll take you, question 2 will take you the most time. But again, it's really not that much time. This whole thing might actually only take you half an hour. So maybe this part is 15 minutes or something. But really sit down, turn your music off, and just contemplate what is involved in creating the service that you are delivering to clients. Because every minute that you spend here will make you hundreds of thousands of dollars. No joke. Okay, now that you have a giant list of tasks, what you need to do is you need to group each of these tasks based on their job role. And so, for instance, if you are doing that PPC agency example that I mentioned earlier, you probably have a bunch of tasks like build keyword list, write copy, write creative, right? Set up weekly call with client, do weekly call with client, right? You've broken this down really granularly. So what do you do now? Well, you basically just need to group all of these tasks based off of the job role that you would like to have take care of it. And this is an interesting sort of problem, because the purpose of this is to try and minimize the number of job roles involved in doing all of these tasks. Ideally, you just want 1, 2, maybe 3 people doing all of these tasks to deliver your service, because the fewer moving parts, the less of a pain in the ass, the fewer opportunities for things to go wrong, that sort of thing. But in practice, this can be pretty complicated. For instance, is the person that writes the copy, should that be the same person that's, does the creative? Sometimes the answer to that question is actually yes. Sometimes you can get an ad specialist that will write the copy and the creative. But other times, these are 2 tasks that you want 2 different people to do, because one person's much better at the copy and one other person's much better at the creative. And so this is sort of a more free-flowing, this is more of an art than it is a science, because you're going to group these based off job role, and then you're very quickly going to figure out if this is an effective way to do it, or if maybe there's a more effective way to group tasks based off that job role. So, identify what these roles are, identify what sorts of core competencies people with that role usually have. If they're an ad specialist, maybe they're better at certain things than others. And then what you need to do is you basically take those job roles, you take those tasks, and then you estimate how much money it would cost you to get that person in that role to do that task. And this is one of the most interesting and fun steps of all time. And if you're still with me, I'm sure some of the stuff has been pretty dry up until now, but just consider what you're doing here. You're breaking down every task and you're figuring out how much money it would take for somebody on your team to do that. Well, basically, you're now architecting the entire financial future of your company. So the ROI of this step is insane. Based off the job roles that you picked earlier, you could hypothetically just pump that into Google with like average salary, figure out what their hourly rate is, and then try and like back calculate how much you think that it would take in order to get one of those things done. I do that all the time. Be realistic here, of course, and always factor a little bit of uncertainty in. So be conservative, maybe multiply whatever numbers you're playing with by like an additional, 1.1, 1.2 or something like that, just so you have some room to play with. But once you have this, you basically have like a whole staffing model for your business, along with what are called fixed and variable costs, which is just insane. 99% of entrepreneurs will never ever make it at this moment. Now you have a list of deliverables. You have a list of the tasks that go into each deliverable. You have a list of job roles required to do the tasks that go into each deliverable. And now you even have the amount of money that you would spend on each of these people to do the tasks that create the deliverable for your client. You have everything that you need to productize. The last step is basically to figure out how much you should be charging. And this is sort of an optional step. It's not necessarily one that you have to do. Sometimes you guys already have a price figured out and that sort of thing. But I find that this is like a mathematical way to price your product to ensure that you're always making a certain margin. And so this is what I like to do in my own businesses, mind you. So the way that you do this is by estimating the internal cost of your product. Basically, you add up the flat fees and hourly rates that you calculated earlier. Maybe the copywriting was $200 and the creative was $150 and the keyword list was $150. You just do all those additions. And then at the end, you have a cost, an internal price that you are paying in order to get this thing done. And that internal price, let's say it's $1,000. All you have to do now is you have to divide this number by a very specific fun formula that I just whipped out of my ass. Now, this is just, bear with me here and it makes sense. You divide it by 1 minus whatever you want your profit margin to be, your gross margin. So let's say you want your cost of goods sold to be 20%. That means that your gross margin is 80%. That means that after you deliver your service, you basically have 80% of that money left over for everything else in your business. And 80% is reasonable. I'd say that's like a pretty solid gross margin. If you can hit an 80% gross margin consistently, you're doing a lot better than most other businesses. So I'm just going to use this as an example. But let's say you want an 80% gross margin. What you do is you divide this number, 1,000, by 1 minus whatever that gross margin is. So if it's 80%, then that's 0.8. Which would be, let's just do the math here, 1,000 divided by 1 minus 0.8 is 1,000 divided by 0.2, or 5,000. And then whatever price that you just got here, unless you have no idea what you're doing, and unless you severely miscalculated and you overestimated a certain amount of money in order to get the thing done, or you underestimated what you want your gross profit margin to be, and you just like made a total dog shit show of it, this price is going to basically be somewhere in the middle of what your competitors are charging for this service. And it's like magic when you do this in practice. It's like absolute magic. If your competitors are making 70% gross margin and then you use 70% for that calculation, most of the time the price that you get is going to be almost the exact same as what your competitors are using. And so this is like a mathematical way of pricing a product. Another thing that I didn't add here in my big fancy blog post is if you want to, let's say, differentiate prices. So you want to have like a big higher tier and then a small lower tier. What you can do is you can just divide everything by, let's say like 1.5 to get your lower tier, and then multiply everything by, like 2 to get your higher tier. And so now you have, let's say, double the reports or something, or double the deliverables, or double whatever. But these costs are fixed, right? They scale, but in a fixed way. And so it becomes very easy to constantly remain at like a similar margin and then just offer slightly different products and differentiate them. But basically you're reverse engineering, you're starting from the end rather than the very beginning like most other companies do. And working in this way basically allows you to just build a scalable money printer. If you do the math and the math works out and you figured that, you can make a lot of gross margin on something, like this is the sort of back of napkin analysis that a lot of people will do before they decide to go into an industry. Like a lot of these private equity guys or a lot of these like big ops guys, they will literally just like be sitting at a cafe thinking and they're like, I wonder how much money it costs to create this coffee. Well, let's think about the deliverable. We have the coffee. How do you get the coffee here? Well, you need somebody to like deliver it, to you physically. So you need like a waitress, and then how do you like roast the beans? Well, you need beans, then you need a roaster, right? They'll just break all this shit down on the back of a napkin. They'll be like, fuck man, the margin in this industry is potentially 80%. I got to get in here, right? So that's why this is so interesting. That's why this is so fun. Anywho, how do I actually use this in business? Well, I use this in my own business, 1 Second Copy, to take us from about $10,000 all the way up to $90,000 a month at our peak. And the process that I use is basically the exact same as what I wrote down here. I mean, this was a little bit earlier on in my entrepreneurial career, so I don't think I was as rigorous with this, but in essence, I used this exact same scaffold in order to determine how I was going to build my writing business. And what I realized was, well, what goes into an article? I got to deliver something. So what am I delivering? Am I delivering like a Google Doc link? Am I delivering like a PDF? How am I delivering it? Am I sending an email with it, right? What I realized was there was like a writing task, there was like an editing task, and I could break those tasks down so that I could save a little bit of money by having maybe people that weren't necessarily as good at certain aspects of English to do the rough draft. And then I could pay specialists to go in there and then, touch up that rough draft, turn it into a fine draft, and then show that to the client. Basically, productization allowed me to squeeze another 10 or 15% out of my margin that most other people can't or couldn't at the time. So very simple example, but because of that, I was able to scale my business like 10 times faster than basically all of my competitors at the time, and then eat up like a sizable portion of the internet. Like, I think we produced like 8,000, maybe 9,000 like really high quality pieces now. And these are pieces that, most people here have probably at least stumbled on or read. So yeah, pretty neat. What I'll cover now is I'll cover a real world example of a PR company that I'm working with. I mentioned a little bit earlier that I'm going to Prague for a month. And I'm doing it because I just basically accepted a big partnership with a PR company. And this is like a very reputable PR company. It's with, dozens of celebrities have gone through this PR process. They've worked with some of the biggest names, like the biggest names. Like we're talking YouTube and Facebook and TikTok. Like these guys are gigantic. But they faced some troubles recently. And the reason why they're facing those troubles is because of those agency issues that are quite typical that I mentioned earlier. They're facing project bloat. They're facing inevitable scope creep. They're facing very, very high payroll costs that are like 60 or 70% of their total revenue. These are very common issues in agencies. I see them all the time. And productization is basically one of the very first things that we're doing together to sort of eliminate this as a problem. So I'm actually just going to give you a real world, like serious example of what I am doing for them. Like I just had a conversation with the founder, not even like 2 hours before I'm recording this video, on this exact process. So, if you know anything about PR, you'll know that one of the big things that PR companies will deliver is they will deliver what are called earned media spots. Now, an earned media spot is basically just like a article about you, or I don't know, like a press release. It'll have like some information about your company or some cool, exciting project that you're working on, right? And basically, in order to do this earned media spot, in order to receive it, you need to pitch a certain number of journalists on your project. Helps if you're well connected, of course. A certain percentage of those journalists will say yes, and then a certain percentage of those journalists will actually go through and then write a story and then publish it on Forbes or entrepreneur.com or some magazine or some shit like that. And so if you think about it, the main deliverable here that we are providing in this PR company is we are providing an earned media spot. And in order to break that down into tasks, we just look at, okay, well, like what goes into that? So how would I productize this PR service, and what exactly am I doing in order to get there? Well, I'm literally just following the same thing that I just wrote up above, the same 6 steps here that I use to productize my own business. So, I started out by figuring my deliverables, which are obviously those earned media spots. Then I asked myself, okay, what happens in order to produce this deliverable? And in the case of this PR agency, we started with, okay, how many earned media spots we want per month? We want 5, let's say. What's a typical conversion rate per, let's say, email outreach? Let's say 0.5% to be conservative. And that is quite, well, it's not super conservative depending on the industry. Realistically, this might be like 0.25 on average, but this company just does it a lot better than most other businesses do. Anywho, okay, great. So we know that the typical conversion rate is 0.5%. We know that we want 5 spots every single month. Well, then how many emails do we have to send out in order to achieve this mathematically? Well, we do 1,000 emails times 0.5% equals 5 spots. We figure out that it's 1,000 emails basically that we need to send. Okay, well, if we know that we need to send 1,000 emails a month, or 1,000 journalist emails a month, then what do we need in order to do that? Well, we need a place to do the emails. So like we need a cold email platform. We need a lead source in order to get a list of those journalists. We need a way to scrape that. Maybe it's like a software platform to do the scraping, right? How much do all these things cost? On average, the email platform that we're using is about $100 a month. It's called Instantly, which you guys are probably very familiar with at this point if you watch my videos. We need a lead source. And we're using sort of like a closed lead source here, which I'm not going to share, but it ends up being about $100, maybe $150 a month, depending on the lead volume. Then we need a system to scrape them, which I've set up, but there are other services out there that do that. Let's say it's about $100 a month. So we know that now in order to email 1,000 journalists per month, at minimum we're spending $300. This is great. What else do we need? Well, obviously we need somebody to do the freaking work. So what sort of work needs to happen? We need to set up the email campaign. We need to write the email campaign. We need to manage responses for this email campaign. Presumably some journalists are going to ask questions, so you just want somebody to be there when they do, right? All right, great. What sort of role would be responsible for doing those tasks? Let's just call them a PR specialist. I just whipped this out of my ass. I don't actually know if they're going to call them a PR specialist, but that's just what I'm going to call them right now. How much time and money do you think it would cost a PR specialist to do this? Well, I looked online and I found a bunch of publicly available data for similar roles to PR specialists at about $30 an hour. I know that, on average, we're going to guesstimate it's 5 hours to build this list. So that's 30 times 5 is $150. And then let's say it takes us half an hour a day to manage the responses. If we're sending 1,000 emails a month, then that means that we're sending 50 emails Monday to Friday, basically, because there are 20 working days in a month, right? 50 emails, if we have like a 5% response rate, we're still only getting 2.5 responses a day. Realistically, anybody should be able to manage that in half an hour, right? I think that's a reasonable assumption. That's the assumption that I shared with the founder as well. He thought was pretty fine. So what's the total cost of this per month? That's $300. So then how much money does it actually cost us to run this whole campaign and deliver this deliverable of 5 earned media pitches, which we are delivering, by the way, in the form of a weekly report? Well, it's $300, whatever our software costs are, plus $150. Oh, sorry, I lied. $150 plus $300, so $450 a month. Plus, and I didn't actually add this up here, but the other 3 software platforms that we're using, so $750 a month. So the desired profit margins are 80%. What we would do is we'd go 750, and then I go 1 minus 0.8, same formula I did before, and I divide the two. And I get a total cost of $3,750 for this earned media product. Maybe we want multiple products. Well, if I wanted multiple products, let's just multiply everything by 1.5. If I want, instead of 7, let's say I want an average of 8 or something like that, well, now I'm going to charge $5,625 for those 8 earned media spots. If maybe we want a lower plan to be able to get people that just want to get their toes dipped in the water, well, maybe we'll go $3,750, and then we will divide that by 1.5 for $2,500. And so now instead of 5, maybe we're delivering like 3, right? You see mathematically how these costs scale up. And obviously I need to change this because I forgot to add these software platforms, but you guys get the idea. And this is like a real example of something that companies out there pay me anywhere from like $5,000 a month to like $15,000 a month to do for them, to just jump in, do productization, build an operational process to get all these things done. Specifically in the agency space, it's one of the simplest and most straightforward, and honestly, one of the funnest things to do too. So yeah, it's how I grew my own business to what I'd consider very impressive numbers, and it's how I'm growing a ton of other businesses as well. And I highly recommend that you guys at least consider productization in your own business. And then if you guys are doing one time, then try and get on a recurring productization scheme, because those are usually a lot more profitable. Okay, thanks so much for watching this video, guys. If you guys got any questions about how to implement productization in your own company, feel free to reach out, ask me, leave a comment down below. I've been a little bit behind on these comments recently, but I'm going to try and get into a habit of clearing it once a week until I'm obviously super crazy famous and I can't. If you guys want anything more about agencies or productization, just let me know. I really do like talking more about the ops side of things, especially recently with the work that I'm doing. But I am also happy to dive into Make and dive into some of these other automation platforms if there's a demand for it. Otherwise, like, subscribe, and I'll catch you on the next video. Thanks so much.